Hello and welcome back to the Center for International Reproductive Health Training series on writing scientific journal articles. This is the third module on the results section of a scientific journal article. I'm Ella August, Clinical Assistant Professor in the University of Michigan School of Public Health. In this module, using examples throughout, I'll break down the results section into two parts. The first part, where you describe your sample, and the second part, where you present data that answers your research question. I'll go through some examples to highlight key practices you can use when developing your text, figures, and tables. I'll discuss making sure your results are consistent with your research question and your methods section. And I'll refer you to additional resources that come with this module, a handout with tips that are not covered in this video. So, the first part of your results section will describe who is in your study population. Most often, this is done with a table, and often it ends up being Table 1 unless you included a table in your methods section. You'll also write some results text describing your sample. So let's look at a Table 1 from a paper that was published in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology called Longitudinal Study of Quantitative Changes in Pelvic Organ Support Among Paris Women. So first of all, take a look at this title of this table. It tells us what information is in the table, participant characteristics of their sample. The authors had to choose one time point for these results, and you can see here they're showing results from the baseline visit, which is pretty typical for a longitudinal study. If you think about it, people don't usually read journal articles from beginning to end. In practice, they might scan the abstract and then go straight to the figures and tables, and if the results are interesting enough, they might circle back to spend more time with the article. With that in mind, knowing readers won't necessarily read all the text before arriving at your Table 1, let's take a closer look at this table. The comparison groups are type of birth, which is the exposure variable in this particular study. The descriptive table in a study is often presented by either the exposure variable, as it is in this case, or by the outcome variable. The first column is women with cesarean births, and the second is vaginal births. Also, notice on the column headings how clear the ends are for each subgroup of participants. That's really nice. Now, let's take a look at the rows. They include demographic characteristics that describe the sample. We can get a sense of how old the study participants were at their first delivery, their race, number of deliveries, etc. Often, descriptive tables include everything on the exposure side of the research question, and that's pretty much the case here. Most of these row variables are used in models later on in the results. Here's another example of the first part of results, describing the sample. In a paper published in the International Journal of Obstetric Anesthesia, before describing the characteristics of their sample, the authors describe who made it into their sample and who didn't, and present the final N for their analytic sample. And this gives you insight into how well the sample represents what the target sample they were shooting for. It's also indirectly an argument that the authors are credible, because it's obvious from reading this text that they carefully track these details and that they are transparent about them, which engenders trust in the rest of the results. The second part of your results section answers the study questions that you posed with additional text, tables, and figures. In the next few slides, I'll provide some guiding principles for writing your results text with a primary focus on your research question rather than the procedural details and tests that you used. This paper in contraception offers a really nice example of results text. This paragraph is the beginning of what I'm calling the second part of results, where the authors answer the research questions they posed earlier. In the following slide, I'm going to take a closer look at this first sentence here and describe why it's so effective. So here's the first sentence from that previous slide. Women with low-lying IUD were more likely to report a big problem with dysmenorrhea in the past 12 months than women with a normally positioned IUD. So the first thing to notice is that the focus here is on the association rather than a particular statistical test or p-value. If this sentence read, the odds ratio for IUD in dysmenorrhea was 3.2, it wouldn't be nearly as strong because the focus is on the statistical test, which is really just a tool the authors used to find answers. For the same reason, if this sentence read, the association for IUD in dysmenorrhea was significant, it wouldn't be effective. A sentence like this is too focused on the p-value and not enough on the actual questions. Another thing that makes this sentence effective is that they specified the direction of association. Women with IUD were more likely to report dysmenorrhea. If these words weren't included, it would only generically refer to the association without conveying that it's a positive association between IUD and dysmenorrhea. This is really important when you're describing relationships, especially between continuous variables. Here's an example of a clear description of the direction of an association. It's clear here that when one variable increases, the other variable also increases. Don't assume your readers will know the direction of the association. So, going back to our main sentence, another feature that makes this a good sentence is that it's a strong lead for the paragraph. The sentence makes an argument about the findings, and the rest of the paragraph, which you can see if you flip back to the previous slide, supports this argument with evidence from their data. One final thing about this sentence, the authors refer to Table 3 at the end because that's where the reader can find the details. In some ways, this is a style thing, but I really like how this is tucked in at the end of the sentence rather than being the focus of the sentence. I encourage you to look at the rest of this paragraph and notice how it's written. I included this section, this example from the results section of a paper from the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology to remind you that null findings, that is, non-significant findings, are important to report. It's easy to forget about them, but remember, null findings are still a finding and something we can learn from. Now I want to transition to visual presentation of results. We're going to look at a figure from this paper on body warming and maternal hypothermia in the International Journal of Obstetric Anesthesia to make 2 points about the role that these non-textual elements should be playing in your paper. The important points here are that each table and figure should offer a clear message, and tables and figures should complement rather than repeat the information from your results text. So let's start by taking a look at this figure from the body warming paper. I made the legend a bit bigger here to make it easier to read. Go ahead and stop your video and take a minute or two to decide what you think the message is. If you did stop the video, what did you come up with as the message here? It seems clear to me. There's not much difference in body temperature in the 3 comparison groups across all the different time points shown in the figure, but there is one significant difference here. It looks like the forced air group has the warmest temperature at recovery room entry plus 15 minutes. So I consider this an example of a figure with a clear message. The other thing I like about this figure is the large amount of information that's summarized in a really efficient way. You can't possibly be as efficient with text. That's another hallmark of an effective figure, but only if the message is clear. The other thing to remember about figures and tables is that they should be understandable on their own without reading the text. So this figure has sort of already passed that test since we were able to understand it without referring to the text in the previous slide. The other thing that figures and tables should do is provide detailed information that is not repeated in the text. The text should point out patterns and trends. So let's take a look at this figure together with its companion text. The text walks the reader through each pattern shown on the figure, which is helpful because there's a lot to take in. The first sentence points out the general pattern across all time points and comparison groups. The second sentence summarizes information on two key time points: admission to recovery room and the one data point where there was a significant difference between the groups. So the text and the figures here are complementary and do not feel repetitive. They're both understandable on their own. Finally, when you finish drafting your results, it's important to go back and check to make sure you're answering everything you posed in your research question and nothing more. Additionally, double-check that results you present are based on statistical tests and other methodology that you've already explained in your methods section. In sum, this module recommended strategies for writing and presenting results. Your results describing your sample should not feel repetitive between the table and text. Focus on answering your research question rather than focusing on statistical tests. Each figure and table should have a clear message. Tables and figures should be understandable on their own without reading the text. See additional tips on preparing your results section in the Tips for Preparing Your Results section handout provided as a companion to this module. That's it for this module. Thank you.